Thank you, Ibon. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. I certainly did. And I hope to keep you entertained for the next 45 minutes without you falling asleep for the after lunch dip that most people get. I will be talking about using language archives, in particular finding and depositing resources of minoritized languages. So just briefly about myself, I work at the Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics in Nijmegen. We have a fairly large archive of language resources in languages from around the world, many of which are endangered languages. We've been doing this for quite a while. In the late 90s, we started to systematically basically archive collections of languages because many of the linguists working in our institution were collecting lots of data in many field sites across the world, and we thought, well, we need to preserve these materials in a systematic way. So we started to develop this archive in the late 90s and have been doing that ever since. So finding language resources. With language resources, I mean all kinds of materials in languages. Can be recordings, texts, maybe also even tools for a given language. How do you go about finding those online? Of course, there are a few obvious ways to go about it. You can use a normal web search engine, Google, Bing, or if you're a bit more privacy conscious, you might use DuckDuckGo or something like that. Works reasonably well. Nowadays, of course, also lots of people use an AI chatbot instead of a search engine to find materials online. Works also remarkably well. So if you ask Gemini or ChatGPT, find me some audio recordings of the Lemko language, you get some results, some good results actually. The only thing with these two methods I mentioned is that they use an algorithm to rank the results, and the way those algorithms work are not clear to people who do not work at these organizations. So there are a lot. It a lot depends on how optimized the web resources are for finding them by search engines. So there's a whole field called search engine optimization. People earn a lot of money in that domain, and the better you are in that, the higher ranked you are in search results. But a lot of online language resources do not have the means to deploy this, so they might not rank as high as one would like. So an alternative way to get to language resources is via the website or the catalog of an individual language archive. And for example, there is this Deliverable consortium of language archives that are specialized in preserving collections of endangered languages. I'll come back to that in the next slide. Another way is to go via so-called metadata aggregators. These are services that harvest metadata. So I will talk a fair bit about metadata in this talk. Metadata is the data about the data that depositors have provided. So the what, who, when, where about the data. So you describe your resource by who created it, what the language was, where it was recorded, for example, maybe something about the speakers, their age, and so forth. That's all metadata about the data. And those metadata from different archives, different repositories are harvested by some services and then are made searchable via a central interface. So two examples I will illustrate are the Clarin Virtual Language Observatory and the OLAC search engine. So this Deliverable network that I mentioned, sort of an umbrella body for archives that preserve materials on endangered languages and cultures. There are currently 14 member archives, full members, and 5 associate members. Some of them have a more regional focus, and some have a more global coverage of languages that they not specialize in, but that they archive. And you can find descriptions and links to these various archives on this Deliverable website. The CLARIN infrastructure. So CLARIN stands for Common Language Resources and Technology Infrastructure. It's a European research infrastructure consortium, and it is funded by contributions from currently 24 member countries that participate in this consortium, and they make services available for mainly the research community that specializes in language and humanities research. So there are a number of centers in this infrastructure. There are different types of centers, and there's actually one here at this very faculty specializing on Basque. And our center in Nijmegen is also one of the CLARIN centers. There's the B-type centers. They actually provide resources, so recordings and other types of resources in different languages. And those centers are then harvested by this CLARIN Virtual Language Observatory that I mentioned. So this is, I will show it to you live in a moment. So this interface that allows you to search and have some facets that you can narrow down exactly what you would like to look for. But this is the URL. I'll skip showing it so that I can show all the online resources one after the other, that I don't have to switch between browser and PowerPoint too many times. So another sort of metadata aggregator is from the Open Language Archives community. They also aggregate metadata in a different format from various archives and organizations around the world. For many years, this was actually not working anymore because the original people that created this tool, they didn't have the capacity to keep it up, and the organization that hosted the technical server said at some point, yeah, we're going to shut this down. It's too much of a security risk to keep it running. So for a few years, it didn't work anymore. But now there's within the Deliverable network, there's a group of people that have taken it up to create a new version of the search, which is currently still ongoing. There is a preliminary version online, which is not the final version yet. It still needs to be made a bit more polished and have different ways of searching, but it's online already, and in September the launch is planned for the new full version of this search interface. That's the URL for the OLAC. Just briefly, I want to talk a bit about language codes. So as you know, many languages go by a number of different names. So Basque in Basque is not Basque, but is Euskara. And there are also not just different names in different languages, but also sometimes there's a preferred name by the community as opposed to a name that linguists have given to the language at some point. So there's many languages that go by different names, and also the other way around, some languages share the same name. So in order to have a unique identifier for a given language, certain language codes have been developed. There is one ISO standard. Federico mentioned ISO standards this morning. There's also an ISO standard for language codes, which is called ISO 639. I'll come back to that in a moment. But what a lot of linguists nowadays also use is glottal codes, which comes from the Glottolog database, which is a different way of classifying languages and codes for them. So the ISO 639 family consists of a few different parts, actually. For us, the most interesting one is this part 3, or set 3, as it's called nowadays, which is covering almost 8,000 languages at the moment. So that's a 3-letter code in principle for all languages in the world. That's the goal. First version was based on the Ethnologue publication published by SIL International. SIL International is also the registration authority. So if people want to propose a change to the language codes or a new language to be added, or sometimes languages turn out to be two different languages and the code needs to be split. So that sort of changes. They have to be submitted to SIL. It's a widely used set of language code. Most archives use these language codes. There are some issues with it. In some parts of the world, the SIL International is not seen as a very favorable organization, so they don't want to use this standard that much. Like in Latin America, that's sometimes the case. But in general, it's still the most comprehensive standard that is there probably, and it's widely used. So this Glottolog online bibliographic database of the world's lesser known languages is published by people from the MPI in Leipzig, curated by Harald Hammerström, Martin Haspelmet, and other people. And if you want to add a language or submit a change request, that's done via GitHub. So it's quite a bit more transparent than how the ISO language codes process is currently taking place. One advantage of the Glottolog is also that it shows you, and you can search by alternate names of the languages, which is not the case for the ISO list. And there are cross links. So from Glottolog, you can see the ISO 6393 and various other links to other databases. Okay, let me just briefly show you these metadata aggregators that I was talking about. But this is this Clarin Virtual Language Observatory. If you go to that URL, it just shows you a search box, but you can click this See All Records button as well, and then you get a more elaborate search interface where you can narrow down by different facets, as they call it. So, for example, if I want to search for some Basque resources, you can select it there. Maybe I would like to search for a certain type of file, for example, audio files. And then you get some results on the right-hand side, and you can open them up. You get some metadata that is then harvested from the location where this resource is located. In this case, that's the Cocoon repository in France. I click on this folder here and see what kind of resources are in there. So here there's an audio file. If I click on that link, it will take me to the actual place where this file is located, which is, as I mentioned, the Cocoon repository. You have the metadata as they show it. They also have a little map to show where the location of the resource is. And then sometimes you can immediately download the resource. In this case, I have to accept here some condition. And then so this is Frog Story. For those of you who don't know Frog Stories, it's basically you give the participant a picture book that has no words, just pictures of a story about a frog, and the task is that they tell this story in a language, which is a good elicitation tool to get sort of a comprehensive story told in the language. So the other aggregator I mentioned is this OLAC search. So here is basically the OLAC homepage, and here is the link to the actual search interface, which is quite basic at the moment. As I said, this will be updated in September. So the thing is that right now here it lists only the language codes. So that's what I just was talking about. So if I want to search for a given language, I right now in this current version, I have to know the language code. So suppose I want to search for Slovene language, I would have to know, I already looked it up beforehand, but just for the purpose of the demonstration, I need to know the language code of Slovene. And here on Wikipedia, you usually find the language codes in the different standards. So this is the 6393 I just mentioned. So the language code for Slovene is SLV. I also see the glottolog code there. So if I now in my search here type SLV, I should find some resources in the language. For example, here there is a web corpus, which is hosted by Claire in Slovenia. So this is a text corpus of what is it, 6.3 million texts and 1.9 billion words. So it's quite a substantial text corpus, which would be very useful for training a large language model, for example, or many other language technology applications. Right, back to the PowerPoint. So, well, I found some resources. Of course, I've tried these searches out before so that I was sure that I found the right materials. It doesn't go always that smoothly. You might encounter issues when you're searching and looking for materials. One is that the materials are not always openly accessible. In our archive in Nijmegen, we distinguish 4 access levels. So some materials are completely open. You don't need to have an account or anything. You can just download them. For some, you need to be a registered user. So you have to have an account. We manually look at these registrations and make sure they're from a genuine person, because there are a lot of bogus registrations from bots nowadays. There's also the academic level. So in this case, you can log in with your own academic account for some organizations. If your organization is not part of this identity federation, we can apply this level to you manually. And then many of the resources are also restricted. In this case, you need to provide a description of what you would like to do with these materials and describe who you are. And then we have to check whether this is in line with the consent that participants have given for these materials. And that often means that we have to go back to the original depositor to ask for permission. So that might take a while. So that's a bit of a barrier to get access to these materials, but it's understandable given that there are privacy considerations, in particular with indigenous communities. It is a barrier. Some people don't even ask for permission if they get to a login page or we believe that in our repository there are quite a few resources that are currently at this most restrictive level, whereas they don't necessarily need to be, which is more a political issue that depositors are maybe afraid of taking too much responsibility of making the materials less restrictive, which is understandable, but that's currently the situation. Also, it's not really a sustainable solution because depositors, of course, at some point retire, at some point they die, so we cannot depend on them forever for granting access to these materials. So we try to also get them to specify an organization or another person that can be in charge if they are no longer able to respond, or ideally come up with a set of rules that we can then evaluate for people who would like to get access to materials. Sometimes also you might find that content is no longer where it used to be, so it has moved, or maybe it's no longer available. And also an issue is that interfaces for many language archives are only in English. Sometimes they have a translation into another major language, Spanish, Portuguese, but still, most language archives do not have translations in many other languages, which is a bit of a barrier for community access to these materials. What you might also find is that metadata is often not complete because it's time consuming to create these metadata descriptions, and so it's often done in hindsight when the resources have already been created many years ago, so they might not remember all of the details. Also, an issue can be that the recording quality is not ideal. Of course, many recordings are made in a field site situation, which is not a recording studio, so there might be chickens running around making noises. So it's for certain purposes that of course is a bit of an issue. And yeah, one big obstacle is that a lot of the materials are not transcribed. We have a lot of collections where teams have collected hundreds of hours of recordings, but it's a huge amount of work to transcribe and analyze and translate all these materials. So hopefully, with advances in ASR, we can bridge this gap somewhat in the near future. Also, yeah, there might be issues with file formats, so you might need to convert it into a different format before you can work with it. Yeah, and sometimes there's a lack of documented conventions for the transcriptions and the annotations. One thing I would like to also mention, which is sometimes or quite often not happening yet, is to please cite language resources if you use them for your research. So just as citing another publication, citing online language resources is very important to sort of acknowledge the work that has gone into it, and maybe in the long run make for better recognition of this work for an academic career. Right now, it's still not at the same level as a publication, even though it's a huge amount of work to create a language corpus and publish that in an archive. So I'll move on to some things about archiving and long-term preservation. So archiving and sharing research data is nowadays getting quite a common part of normal scientific practice, fortunately. So it's more and more seen as something that is just part of the job. Of course, if it concerns language data of minority languages, it's important for preserving the rich cultural resources for current use, but also for future generations. There's now a lot of focus on making research data fair, which stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, which is great. But for language resources, you also have to be taking into account that the data can often not be truly open because of sensitivity of the materials. And there are also the care principles that need to be taken into account for indigenous data governance. Yeah, I'll move on. So what's very important also, if you still come across analog media, some people still find old tapes, cassettes in a shoebox in the attic or so of a retired researcher. These materials don't have eternal life. So at some point, these physical tapes deteriorate and they can no longer be played back. If you still have the machinery to play them back, that's also an issue. So we still, at the MPI, we still have a lot of very old-fashioned equipment, cassette players, open reel tape players, video cassette players. So we can still digitize a lot of these materials, but that's in the long run that becomes more and more difficult. So it's important to digitize these materials in a timely manner. Then when you talk about digital preservation, there's basically two aspects. So you may need to make sure that the files survive. So that's called bitstream preservation. So also digital carriers, hard drives, and so on don't have eternal life. So before they break down, you have to migrate to the next digital carrier. But it's also about preserving the content. File formats don't have eternal life either, typically. So some people might have worked with WordPerfect in the past. That was very common. back in the day. Nowadays, nobody uses it anymore. If you come across a word perfect file, nowadays everybody uses Microsoft Word or Google Docs or something like that. Word perfect files are now a challenge to open and to convert to a current file format. Metadata is important and essential for findability, but also for future use of the materials. There's this standard called Core Trust Seal for trusted digital repositories. That's 16 requirements for digital archives that they need to adhere to show that they do the right things to preserve these materials and make them available. So if a repository is certified, you are a bit more certain that your materials are in a good place. So if you want to prepare materials for an archive, it's a good idea to already contact the archive you would like to work with. So for example, look on the Deliverable website for an archive that's appropriate for the materials that you have. Check if they have sort of a policy on their website for accepting new deposits. And then contact them with your request and familiarize yourself with their specific workflows and requirements. So they share a lot of common things, but they also have very often in the details, they have specificities that vary per archive. Some archives offer you a self-deposit web interface where you basically upload your own resources, and others don't have such thing. It's important to, as I mentioned, file formats don't have eternal life, so many archives have a required list of formats that they accept, or at least strongly suggest. So, for example, in our archive, we don't take MP3 files. We would like WAV files, uncompressed WAV files for audio recordings, and we also don't like Microsoft Word documents. We would rather have PDF or open document, which is a bit more of an open standard. File naming is also important. So if you have a file called img_1816.mp4, that doesn't say very much about what it is. So that's the name that comes straight from your recording device. But if you want to deposit this in an archive, it's good practice to have a more descriptive name. So maybe include something like a date and a descriptive part of what the resource is about. Of course, you will also create the metadata description for the resource, but still, as a good practice, it's good to have some naming scheme that also makes a bit of sense. Then, yeah, you have to also prepare the metadata that is in a format that's recommended by the archive. Know which fields are needed. Ideally, you already know this when collecting the data, such that you can take this into account when doing the field work, for example. And also think about access policies. So if you collecting data with a community and you have you ask for consent, make sure that this is in line with how you would like to publish the resources later on, at which access level that the archive might provide. So I've already mentioned metadata a few times. So there are a couple of standards that are commonly used for language resources. But there's the OLAC standard, which is basically similar to the Dublin Core metadata standard that's used in the library community. It's just a bit enhanced for language resources. Within the Clarion community, we use something called CMDI, which is not a single schema, but it's more like a framework for defining metadata profiles that can have different fields. So depending on the exact focus of the repository, they might have different profiles for their particular purpose. Some also use TEI. The header of the TEI does some place for metadata for the resource. So the SIMD metadata I already mentioned. So it's not in a single schema, but rather these profiles. And the interoperability between the profiles is ensured by having concept links. So if you say, okay, I describe a speaker of the language, you have to, your term speaker then needs to link to a concept link that says what the speaker is, and all those profiles will have to do that so that they can then later on be made interoperable with one another. Yeah, Olak I already mentioned. So it's a rather a small metadata set, which can be both an advantage and a disadvantage. It's more easy to collect and to create these metadata files, but you might not be able to describe everything that you might want in the OLAC format. If you look at metadata in the different archives, they have different ways of visualizing them. So here, this is an example from the Endangered Language Archive in Berlin, the ELAR archive. They have languages, actors, which is an actor basically is any person that was involved in making the recording. So that could be a speaker, but also a researcher, person doing the transcription, for example. Something about the type of resource, media files, written resources, something about the location, the topic of this particular resource. And that's all also searchable within the interface of the ELR archive. This is an example from the Paradisec archive in Australia, which is focused on Pacific Australia. So they typically include also a small map of where the resource was created, which is quite nice, I think. This is from our archive in Nijmegen. And in this example, they've also added descriptions in multiple languages. It's not often the case that the depositors do that, but it is possible to provide descriptions in more than one language. Well, I already mentioned this basically, but collecting metadata is best done while creating the resources. So if you make recordings at the same time, it would be good to already collect the metadata for the recording, because, well, later on you may no longer remember all of the details. So it saves you time in the long run as well. There are some specialized tools for entering metadata. So for example, there's this Lameta tool, which is also used by the ELAR archive in Berlin, for example. But a lot of people also use spreadsheets to just enter the metadata and convert it into the archives format at a later stage. And actually, I found that AI models can be quite helpful in doing these quite trivial transformations from a spreadsheet to an XML format. So that might be useful to employ. I'm almost at the end, actually, of the presentation. Something I would like to draw your attention to is this online course, Archiving for the Future. It's quite a comprehensive course of all the steps that are involved in preparing materials for deposit in a language archive. It's freely accessible online. It's created by Susan Kung from the ILA archive in Austin, Texas, and other colleagues. So that's yeah, very, very good, very useful resource to use. And I've also included a few links here. The ELA archive has also created quite a few documents and videos about depositing languages. We also have for our own repository a manual and some screencasts on how to do this. And the Paradisec archive also has some deposit information on their site. Yes, that's basically what I wanted to tell you. So I just think that we have enough time for questions if you have.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Paul. Very interesting, very comprehensive, and very sort of listener-friendly as well. I have a question, which is my own curiosity, but I guess might also be relevant and interesting and helpful for some of the colleagues here. I've been involved in related efforts in the past, and especially for minoritized languages, which are our focus today and in the workshop. In my experience, there has always been a tension between how big, how well curated a resource needs to be for a minoritized language or underserved, under-resourced language to be worth sharing, which obviously has a clear answer for major, well-resourced languages that, if it's something is a toy resource, just, a glossary with 10 terms, it's probably irrelevant in the big pond of resources for that language. But for example, say a small-scale student project for an MA level dissertation or something that somebody digitizes an old book they find in a shelf at home. When is it worth sharing it? Where does it help the cause of advancing the support for that language? Is there a cutoff point? Is anything at all good enough? Because there's a matter, as I see it, I may be wrong, and I'd like to hear your views on this. A matter of quantity, so probably a glossary, a monolingual glossary of 5 terms about everyday language may not be interesting at all. But there's also a matter of quality in terms of curation and metadata, as you said. So would you be in favor of, for minoritized languages, anything goes, anything is helpful because it can bootstrap, or should there be any thresholds of quantity/quality?
I think pretty much anything goes, because, for many languages, there may not be a lot of opportunities to collect more than what's currently available. So also, we also have a lot of legacy materials for which the metadata is very sparse because, there's typically not a lot of known. There's a little bit of text scribbled on the label of a tape and not much more. What do? Do you say, okay, this metadata is inadequate, so we don't archive the recording? No, you take it and archive it as it is, even though it might not be perfect. It's better than having nothing at all. That's my take on it.
Thank you very much, Paul. I have another question. So, for example, you showed Slovene. Then in Slovene, or I mean, beside of Slovene, we have all these Slovene dialects, variations. In my region, they wouldn't count as own languages. Could you say something about? Excuse me. Now it's better. Yes, it's much better. So Slovene has, in my region, and also Slovenia, a lot of these dialects and variations. And when would they be kind of worth to archive it? So let's say, I know that dialectologists do a lot in our region. They have it written down, but I wonder, I don't think it's still online. They are kind of former generation, if I can say like this. So maybe it's not online. I have to confess, I don't know it now, but it should be somehow.
I think the answer is basically the same. It's certainly worth preserving the materials, and the best way to do that is depositing them with an archive, because project websites come and go, and even within universities, departments might be closed and down at some point. Resources might disappear. So I think a specialized archive for language materials is the best place to make sure that the materials survive in the long run. So yeah, in terms of the language classification, the language codes. So probably, I haven't looked this up, but probably Glottolog has more different codes for the different dialects for Slovene. So that would be a way of classifying them better, making them searchable as their own distinct dialect or language or whatever you want to call it. I think so. Well, I haven't looked this up. We could have a look what Glottolog has to say, for example. So here they have they have various varieties, but I don't think they currently have their own code. No. doesn't look like they have a dedicated code. So there's some work to do for you maybe.
No more questions. Yes, Justina.
Thank you for this very interesting presentation. I have a very practical question. Okay. A very practical question. Would it be possible to upload this presentation, maybe along with the recording, we have recording of the session to the Foster Lang website, to the resources, because I think it would be like a very useful like guide for people and like a reference point if they want to do something about archiving or systematized what they want to know. It would be very useful to have it.
We will be doing it as part of the deliverable anyway. So yeah, we will put the materials online tomorrow.
Just a presentation, I think might be more accessible than Deliverable, right? Easier to handle for by individual.
The deliverable will point to the website where we will put the PowerPoints and the
Okay.
videos of today's session.
Okay, thank you.
No more questions. So thanks again. Fantastic. Well,
Thank you.